Hello, everyone. Smatho 10 here from Daily Fantasy Rankings for the next edition of the DFS Down Under Show presented by Draft Stars. Draft Stars are your home for Australian DFS, offering customers here in Australia and New Zealand to win cash prizes at your chosen sport. We're back here for round 4 of the AFL, and also I'm here on location this week on a little Easter holiday, so nice to see everyone for the show tonight. Now, as always joined by the guru for AFL DFS. That is the Big Hef. Let's bring him up here. How are you, mates?
Oh, geez, caught me on the hop there, Smatho. How you going, mate? You're on tour, I hear.
Yes, I'm up at Port Stephens, which is a lovely part of the world here, just north of Newcastle. I'm actually in the in-laws caravan doing the show tonight. They kindly offered me a nice little cubicle of studio here so we can do the show tonight. So obviously if there's any technical difficulties throughout the stream, I do apologize, but so far so good for this particular. Oh, and then the moment comes back as just I said.
The in-laws from Tassie, Smatho.
No, they're not. They're actually from Newcastle.
It's on that bloody map behind you. There's no Tassie. Like, what's going on there?
No, it's a beautiful map here of the mainland.
I'm sure there'll be more to be said in the comments than what I'll say about that. But let's get stuck into the show, Smatho.
Yes, let's get stuck in the show. Now, before we talk about AFL, I want to be bringing up one of my favourite weeks of the year. I didn't get to talk about it last year because there was no footy on. Obviously, COVID wrecked that kind of for us, but it's the Masters, and Draft Stars are back with a huge $25,000 contest for the golf's pinnacle tournament of the year. Gets me up every morning from Friday all the way through to Monday morning. Do you get up in the morning there, have to watch a bit of golf?
Get up in the morning, but not for the golf. I'm three little rugrats waking up far too early at the moment, but I might have to flick on the golf, and maybe I'll follow you in, Smatho. You got any advice for us golf novices like myself?
All right, so golf novices, Draft Stars is so easy to play at DFS golf. It's not that funny. All you got to do is pick 6 golfers under a salary cap of $100,000. See if you can get your guys playing the 4 rounds throughout the tournament. If you can, get what we call 6 through the tournament. That will get you in the money. If I want to give you some sneaky tips, here we go. Let me bring up this screen here. Here is my lineup that I will be entering into contests throughout the weekend. Couple of names that you probably know, and then probably a couple of names that you're not quite familiar there, Hef, but I'm pretty keen on a couple of guys that did really well last year. Abraham Answer, Cameron Smith, Justin Thomas. They're my 3 core guys, and then you can sprinkle in a bit of Colin Morikawa and Dylan Fratelli. So $25,000 prize pool there, Hef. Get stuck into draftstars.com.au. Put a team in. They're going to lock just around 10 p.m. on Thursday night, Australian Eastern Standard Time. So I'd love to see you there. And obviously throughout the show, you can always add your comments. And one of the comments I want you to trigger, who's actually going to win the Masters for this year? Pop it in the chat. I'll get them up on the screen throughout the show. And then obviously give Hef a couple of tips throughout the evening. All right,
Fratelli looks very like you, Smatho. Can you bring that graphic back up? Is that why you've got him in the team?
Back up. I love him. Bit of dial on Fratelli. Where is he? No, he's over here. There he is.
What's his name? Dylon. Can't pronounce his own name.
He's South African. He's South African.
That's a love child between you and Damien Barrett, that is.
He played really well in the match play last week, so that's why he's in. He was like the last member in, and he did really well. So he's in a bit of form, Mr. Fratelli. So that's why he's in my Draft Stars team for this week. All right, Hef, let's get into the main reason why we're here. There's 2 cracking games of AFL Daily Fantasy to get through. And the first game here is on Thursday night, which is the Sydney Swans taking on the Essendon Bombers. $75,000 prize pool up for grabs from Draft Stars. Let me go through the key information that you need for this particular contest. First of all, it's a 7:20 p.m. Start here on the Eastern Seaboard. The Swans are huge favourites at $1.20. The line's 28.5, and the total is 177.5. As I said, there was a bit of rain around here in Sydney today, but that should clear up for the game here on Thursday evening. Now, in team news, they brought back Lance Franklin for the Swans, and Dyson Heppel returns for the Bombers. They're the only changes for that particular side. Let me bring up the contest that you can play on Draft Stars this week. Here we go. $75,000 pool on Draft Stars. First prize, $7,415, as it was last Thursday night. You can have up to 125 entries, and there's already a few in there already. Mate, what are your initial thoughts to start with before we can attack this particular slate?
Well, my initial thought is, are the Swans the real deal? Didn't see that coming last week against Richmond. Absolutely blew them off the park. Have not really seen it coming at all from the Swans. And then the Bombers, who were basically down and out after 2 rounds with obviously there's a bit of overreacting going on at this stage of the year, but came out and just absolutely destroyed the Saints. It's not often you'll see a team win by 75 points and then they come out against a team that's $1.20. It's hard to go past the Swans, but wow, we're dealing off a small sample so far this year, and we have seen some cracking matches between Sydney and Essendon up there on that Sydney ground. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't think it's necessarily the fait accompli that the bookies have got it.
All right, let's get stuck into it. Look, I am pretty keen on the Swans in this particular matchup, but the fantasy options for the Bombs are pretty good. And the little stat I want to give to you, Hef, before we get into this is that the Swans through 3 rounds are the stingiest fantasy side in the league. So they give up the least fantasy points. So this could be the stage where the Bombers could break that trend, but bear that in mind as you start making your team.
I'll throw a stat back at you, Smatho.
Yes, mate.
How many tons have they given up this season?
Oh, geez. Tigers, none last week. So for the first round was Adelaide. Sloane, maybe?
They've given up 1 ton all season, and that's to the reborn Tex Walker.
Oh, that's right.
The big Texan. But, no other players have scored 100 this year against Sydney. So that's sobering news if you're looking at playing a few Bombers this week. But something to keep in mind.
Something to keep in mind. All right, let's move on to the first position that we always break down here on the show, and that is the ruck position. And as you can see here in the Draft Stars lobby, you've only got 2 options this week, and there are actually 2 options that you wouldn't mind actually playing here, with Tom Hickey here at 10,470, and then Peter Wright, as we call 2 meter Peter, at 7,220. Now, I've got some notes here about the rucks here, but Clayton, who's just jumped on the chat here, has already got my question that I want to ask you. Howdy, fellas. Thoughts on the dual rucks for Sydney versus Essendon? Like we always talk about, can you play the double rack stack? And then I'm actually quite interested here, Clayton. I'm very interested in this one. What do you think, Hef? Are you going to say no?
I always look forward to when there's a double ruck stack in play because you never manage to spit it out. And I always have a bit of a chuckle when we look back. And you've already given it the double rack stack to us there. Clayton, my apologies. I think he's on the money. Tom Hickey has been really sneaky good this year for Sydney. Much maligned is one way you could describe Big Tom Hickey, but look at those scores there. You've got to consider he's now coming up against basically a non-ruckman in Peter Wright. Did really well up in Brisbane. Tom Hickey, he actually shut down O'Brien in that second game. O'Brien only had 48 going back against him. So it's very hard to see Hickey not making value. And I don't think it's totally over the line for Wright. You see he had 76 last week. We've got to keep in mind that he was playing against St Kilda and they had massive ruck issues of their own. So we haven't seen him against an actual ruckman yet, to be honest, Wright. It's obviously going to be a really popular play to play them both with Wright available there in your forward line. I don't think it's a bad play by any means. I'd lean to Hickey as the better of the 2 players, though.
Okay. I am leaning to Hickey as well. Like I might put Peter in the back pocket for later, but let's just get.
I just want to bring up one point, actually. What do these teams do with their naming teams? Like everyone knows that they name them in the wrong spots. The Bombers have named Nick Cox in the ruck. Like who actually sits down thinking, let's just put Nick Cox in the ruck and send that in? Like, Nick Cox, I hate to see what Tom Hickey would do to Nick Cox in a ruck matchup.
Is he tall enough to be a
He's
ruckman?
tall. No, probably not, but there's not much of him.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on to the backs then. And then there's a couple options I'm really keen here to start with. Jake Lloyd, Callum Mills, and Jordan Ridley are those three. And they're all being priced up over 12,990 if you look at Jordan Ridley there. But Jake Lloyd, the darling of defense fantasy, we get a crack here on a single slate at 15,220. Could we have a combo of all of these three players, or should we just look at one and see if we can get some value in this particular position?
Well, it's probably going to be a common theme because we've talked about how stingy the Swans have been. They've been especially stingy to opposition defence, and they do. We know how much they do like to chip the ball around in the back line, which has definitely been a plus for Lloyd over the past couple of years. Mills obviously stands out here. He's playing a lot more midfield, which is probably well documented. His price is slowly catching up there, but he's definitely in play. Like I would just be picking two Swans a lot of the time. Dawson is quite consistent and not really a name that sort of garners high ownership as well. In terms of looking for some value, the guy that I mentioned down there, Nick Cox, at only 6,500, he does seem to have sort of a wing role, coming off a 75 last game. He's obviously your cheap option there. He might be popular for that reason. And Dyson Heppell's one to talk about coming back into the team. He hasn't attended a centre bounce all season, so that probably explains why they named him in the centre in their team listings. So someone's just having a laugh there at Essendon. But he's going to slot into that. Where was I going on that? He's just going to slot into Mason Redmond's position there off halfback flank. So him and Hind at 10,000, they're both probably slightly underpriced as well. But you've just got this really bad matchup for them.
I do like your Cox Cole at 6,540. I think he's one of the most good value players on the slate here. So I'd rather have him a defender here. So I'm going to pop him in here at 6,540. And then I can't just get away from Callum Mills playing really well in the middle. CBAs, 111 last week against the Tigers. He's going to play really well here. So 14,510 is my particular selection there. All right, Hef, let's move on to the midfield. And look, there's some great options here throughout the midfield, starting with one of the darlings of the Bombers midfield, Zach Merritt at 16,490. But then we have some great options in Kennedy, Parker. Even Errol Goulden at 12,990 is playing absolutely gangbusters fantasy football for us. That is now one of the most premium players on the slate. What a world that we live in. So let's talk about these premium guys first. So you got any leans in terms of who you can look at for this particular match?
Yeah, let's leave Errol for the forwards. We'll group him with these new Sydney forwards that have sort of burst on the scene this year. I want to start with Sydney, and I've just been looking back through the Dons' last few games and looking who they're giving the big points up to. The top midfielders they've come up against are Mitchell, Wines, and Steele. Now, they all fit that inside midfield role, so that's where I'm sort of going to be looking. I've noticed Josh Kennedy hasn't been playing in as many centre bounces as you might expect. He only had 53% last week against Richmond, 69% against Adelaide. They seem to just be moving him around a little bit more because we're used to Kennedy being that mainstay in the middle. It seems more so that it's Parker and Mills that are getting those roles. So it's going to suit Mills, this sort of matchup. So good that you've got him there in the back line. I'd probably lean to Parker over Kennedy, just the way that they're playing. They seem to be going around Kennedy a bit. So Parker would be my top pick there of the premium Sydney midfielders.
All right. I like that too. I like Parker there. All right, let's talk about the injuries to the Essendon, though. We've lost Caldwell, we've lost Shield for pretty much the season. So you must be thinking, that's pretty easy to pick either Zach Merritt or McGrath or even a bit of Darcy Parish. But you'll find the field doing that as well. So how can you get away from these particular guys, or should we just go with the field?
Well, Parish is the guy that stands out to me. He's he's tortured fantasy coaches over the past few years, but I think that's been a bit of Worsfold and a bit of Parrish. We saw last week when the midfield's being cleared out with Dylan Shield out of the team. Jai Caldwell was brought in to play sort of that midfield role. He's out of the team as well. And they finally said, all right, Parrish, have a run in here. And he showed what he's made of. He pumped out the big ton. Obviously, his price hasn't caught up to that yet. He just seems really good value and one of those guys that gets in a salary that hasn't caught up to his role. I'm never going to go against Merritt because teams don't seem to worry that much about Merritt. I don't think Sydney's going to be any difference. He has had big games up there against Sydney before. So if you find that you've got a lot of cheaper guys, which there is a fair bit of value we're seeing in the comments too. There's a couple of guys that have been thrown forward. If you've got plenty of value that you want to play, I don't think there's anything wrong with putting Merritt in there at that high price.
I reckon that's good. I reckon it's good, but in my side tonight, I'm definitely going Parrish. That's fine. Yeah. I'm also, what are your thoughts about McGrath? Like at 40,060, you can probably match Merritt's scoring. He might be like 10 or 15 points behind in the wash up in the end, but without Caldwell, without Shield, he gets a bit of a boost.
Yep. Yeah, he's turned into a pretty safe player now. McGrath, obviously, he's got that big round one score. He shows he has got the ceiling. So, I've nothing against McGrath, that's for sure.
All right. Clayton here on the chat tonight is suggesting the bit of value play tonight is Warner. Still seems cheap at 8,200. What are your thoughts on Mr. Warner?
Yeah, we'll leave him for the forwards because I've got a few little thoughts about these new Swan forwards that hardly of us have ever heard of, and they've just stormed on the scene.
Fair enough. Well, let's leave Warner for later. So therefore, I need some guy to value. Need the cheapie. So down here, Archie Perkins at 5,000. I'm not really interested, but the guy above him here, Braden Campbell at 7,660. Did pump out a 96 in round 2. Obviously just the 49 there, but that price tag, I think we can get to Braden out of these guys down here. Would you agree?
Well, he fits in what we were talking about with the backs there. If we're wanting to use Sydney backs, and especially if you're looking to stack the backs, Campbell plays off a halfback flank, so he's a really good option here in this midfield to give you that extra exposure. If you really wanted to go hard, you've got Mills and Campbell both playing in midfield with Lloyd. All of a sudden, you're starting to really get a dominant back stack there with the Swans. So, but obviously Campbell is a really talented player, high draft pick, big 90 in his only game so far. He's played up there in Sydney. So, yeah, he's really well priced.
All right. Let's move on to the forwards. And obviously Lance Franklin being back does change the Swans' outlook a little bit, but it goes to show back in the last round, they didn't really need him in round 3. So would you be considering Lance Franklin to start with, or should we just be relying on the other Swan forward to start?
Well, I wouldn't say never to Buddy, but he's high risk, high reward, I guess. We saw he kicked a few goals in his first game and only ended up with the 49 points there. So I think they're still sort of easing him into the season a bit, Buddy. I'd prefer to look elsewhere, but I would never tell anyone you can't play Buddy Franklin, especially at that price.
Now, I want to back the truck up. I'm not playing the video tonight because I'm the one backing the truck up. We're talking about the double rack stack here with 2 Meter Peter. So I'm going to include him here at, where is he? Is he here? Where is he? There he is, 7,220. He's definitely going in at 7,220. Now, I want to get your thoughts on the rest of the players here before we lock this team away. But any other value players? A lot of Bombers here. Considering their outlook for goals is not that great. Anyone that stands out in this Bombers or even Swans forward line? Well,
for the Bombers, the Waterman is a mature age recruit who was quite good last week, but he did play a forward role, and I think it's going to be a lot harder to be scoring up against Sydney. The one thing I like about Waterman, he's quite a good tackler. He's a big body, so these sort of more contested games we see up there in Sydney might help him. Perkins at 5,000 is going to be quite popular, and probably for good reason. They've talked about getting him through the midfield a bit. He's got that game under his belt. I want to talk about the three Swans by the names of Errol, Wicks, and Warner. The pricing is quite strange to me. They haven't missed Errol. He's up there at pretty much 13,000, which he's getting 100 every week. There's going to be a week that comes he's not going to get 100, and that might come sooner rather than later for Errol. But so he gets hard to play at 13,000, just knowing how inexperienced he is. Now, Wicks is a guy who did play last year. From memory, he sliced Quayner's leg in half with those big long stops he had last season. So he's got that sort of knee-full grounding last year, Wicks. But is he going to be over-owned off that 124? You see those two games averaging around 70-something. All of a sudden, 11K, it's not that great a return. And you can get Isaac Heaney and Tom Papley for cheaper than Wicks. Like if someone told you that 2 weeks ago, you'd be laughing. But then Warner, which is the guy that Clayton mentioned, interesting fact about Warner is the last 2 weeks he's actually had 53% centre bounce attendances, and you're going to still get him for a low $8,000 price, which is obviously massive return there in his last 2 games. That 80 coming up in Sydney as well. So Warner is clearly the value guy of those three. For some reason, his salary didn't catch up to him like the other two. So he's going to be super popular, Warner, but he looks a player, so it's very hard to get away from him.
Very hard, especially when he's got forward and mid stats as well. So I can take away Braden Campbell here and plug him in and get a little cheaper 11K forward guy here. But as you can see here, 12,870 left, and that brings me up to Jordan Dawson here, who's been very good as well. 105 last week, 87. Defense and forward availability as well. I like him here, and I'm going to click him here to finish that particular side. So what do you think of that particular side, mate?
It does fit in with my narrative of you're linking up a few defenders there. Look, you can play Dawson forward, Campbell and Mills in the midfield. You've got Lloyd down back. You can just there's some really great possibilities for massive Sydney stacks, and just hope they chip it around ad nauseum like they did do against Richmond. It does seem to be a bit of their tactic this year is Dimmer Hardwick's trying to point out that they maybe don't kick it 15 metres all the time, but if that's their plan of attack, we could see some pretty high scoring.
Excellent. Let's move on to the next match for Friday night footy, which is the Port Adelaide Power taking on the Richmond Tigers in Adelaide. A massive $100,000 Draft Stars pool is available for this particular contest on Friday night. Great to see the 100Ks back here for our Draft Stars participants. Currently, Port is a $1.60 favourite, the line at 8.5. The total is around 172.5, and the forecast in Adelaide is pretty good for this pivotal match for both sides. We don't have the teams as of yet, but we are getting some good news from both camps at the moment with Dion Prestia out with a hamstring. He was subbed out last week. There is talk that Jack Ross is probably the likely one-for-one replacement, but then the Tigers then announced today that they have Will Martin and Ryan Mansell in line for a debut. Camden McIntosh was knocked out last week, and he's in concussion protocol, so he won't play. As for Port Adelaide, Tom Rockcliffe actually suffered his own concussion in the sample last week, so he won't be selected in this particular match. And then also the Tigers are sweating on Trent Cotchin after icing his hamstring last week, but he should be good to go for this particular matchup. Let's get back in the lobby again and look at the prize pools that we have here available on Draft Stars. As I mentioned, the $100,000 is available with just under $10,000 on top. There are also the plenty other pools that you can play on here, including the single entry, the micro, the mini, the fiver, and the high roller. It's all there. Let's get into the contest here. The Port versus the Tigers. Hef, what is your initial thoughts of this particular matchup before we start building teams here?
It's not going to be much of a fantasy spectacle, I wouldn't have thought. Port, like Sydney that we've just mentioned, they're a really stingy team from a fantasy perspective, and they'll be snarling this week after basically having their pants pulled down by the mighty Eagles there on Saturday night. Richmond, very worrying signs against the Swans. They did get beaten in this game last year over there at Adelaide Oval, but they did turn the tables in that preliminary final. So there's even a bit more motivation for Port. Forced to pick a side, I'd be leaning to Port to bounce back here against Richmond. I think Richmond are a bit vulnerable.
They are a bit vulnerable. From a fantasy perspective, I'm really keen on Port in this particular matchup. We know that Richmond is not the best fantasy side to target, and especially in these single slates, and up against it at, away from home. You will see a little bit of a feeble for Port stack here tonight. But, mate, let's get through these particular positions, and let's start with the rucks. We've got a few options that you'll need to consider here. Peter Laddams and Toby Nankervis, look, they're really good ruckmen, but they haven't been turning it on in terms of the fantasy sense. And then we've got Scott Lycett here at 12,580, averaging 87 through his 3 games this season. Looks to be the safe play to start with at that particular price tag. What do you think of these particular 3 options that we'll have on Friday night?
Yeah, there's no doubt Lycett's the safe play. Lycett did a really good job against Natanui last week, actually. We know Natanui's a bit of a graveyard for opposition ruckman in a fantasy sense. He scored the 74 there, competed really well. It has been hard to play Lycett at these higher prices given the share he has with Laddams. Laddams does play quite a bit through the ruck, a bit more than your typical forward ruck does. We know Nankervis is a wonderful matchup for any ruckman coming up against him, and we know Port is a really tough matchup. So, yeah, add all that together. Lycett's the safe option. Nankervis seems to pull one out of his hat every 6 or 7 games. So, if you want to take a flyer on Nankervis, there's nothing there to suggest that he's going to perform the best of the 3 rucks, but just every now and then he just bobs up Nankervis. So if you want a little bit of exposure as a flyer, go for it. I think Laddams, though, I think there's a little bit more to Laddams than just going with Lycett. Down there at 7,000, you look at his first 2 scores there. He had a torrid time over in the West. He was really quite poor. But if he's got any sort of pride at all, he'll be really looking to bounce back here. And Richmond is quite a solid matchup for him to do so. So I'm probably not going as far as saying you wanted to go with a double ruck stack. But if you are looking to save a bit of cash, in terms of value, I think Laddams could quite easily come out as the best of the 3. So Lycett's the safe option. Laddams, I reckon he might be a little bit under-owned and he's worth playing in some lineups. Okay.
I reckon in a single entry, I would stick with Lycett, go with the field. But yeah, I take your point on Laddams. If you're going to play a few entries, then yeah, I'll be sprinkling him quite often. Then probably
I'll throw one stat at you, Smatho.
Yeah.
This game last year, Pete Laddams actually had a 90. So there you
go. Yeah, well, that's last
year.
Shortened
quarters. Shortened quarters with Lycett in the team.
Boy.
So
with Lycett in the team, fair enough. Something to think about. All right. Well, let's move on to the backs. I'm going to put. Yes. Yeah, that's perspective that you need on the show here. You can say, yep, he had a 90, but who was it against? It was Vince.
A tougher matchup.
All right, let's move on to the. All right, let's move on to the backs. And like the particular matchup for Thursday night, we've got some nice premium options here. But when you had a side that had Lloyd, Dawson, and Mills score over 100 points on your back line last year, this should really suit Port Adelaide, the likes of Dan Houston, Hamish Hartland, Darcy Byrne-Jones. So let's start on the Port options first. Dan Houston's going to be very popular at 13,680. Would you be plugging him in straight away as your first pick?
Oh, look. Well, I couldn't argue too much. The thing I've noticed about Richmond, we know that the backs against Richmond are probably the spot that you want to attack them. The midfielders, they do give up some points, but you can definitely get them down back. And interesting, the Sydney game might have skewed these stats a bit because we've only had the 3 games so far this season. So taking too much notice of these numbers this early in the season can be a little bit dangerous. But they are giving up a lot of uncontested ball, Richmond. And if Port are going to capitalise on that, you're going to see a lot of these sort of half-backs and the outside. They do have a few good young outside midfielders as well, Port Adelaide. So one area I'd be looking to attack this game would be with a Port Adelaide stack and trying to match up as many defenders and midfielders as I could. So from that point of view, I'd almost be looking to play Houston in the midfield. But look, you can make a case for all of them, these guys that like to get the +6 mark, Hicks, Hartlett, Burn-Jones. Even you go further down to, Burton. Burton is a real +6 merchant at times and definitely was when he was back there at Hawthorn at quite a good price. Even Tom Jonas has been known to get involved in it from time to time. And we're going to throw one more in there because there are some rumours started by Travis Boak, basically, for a guy down the bottom who we've heard a fair bit about in the preseason, a kid called Lockie Jones. There he is there at 5,000. There is talk that he's going to get a debut. He performed well in Sandful senior finals at the end of last season. He's had a bit of a little injury issue, but the raps on him are quite big, pretty high draft pick and ready to play off a halfback flank. So, yeah, he's definitely a guy to keep in mind if he's named.
Fair enough. If he is named, I'll be putting him aside. Before I make up my second selection here, if there's any love for the Tigers backs at all, because they are pretty cheap. Like Dylan Grimes at 6,980. Cheap.
Well,
cheap.
We know how loved Dylan Grimes is in the fantasy community. Well, one guy who is coming back by all reports is Basher Hooley, and it's not often you get to pay $10,000 and take yourself home a little Basher Hooley. So first up from an injury, he can need the run from times, Hooley, but that's really cheap for a player of his quality. So yeah, I'd be looking at him for. And we just need to remember what impact he has on shorts, which shorts sort of cemented himself a bit now. So I don't think Hooley's going to have as big an impact as he has in past years. But the flow-on effect then goes to Baker, who looks reasonably attractive at 9,000. But if Hooley comes back in, he sort of gets shunted one step down the pecking order. So that's something to keep in mind.
Keep in mind. All right. Out of all that, I'm actually going to pick Ryan Burton as my second guy because Dan Houston and Burton do all the kickings and they always play on. So if the Tigers are going to hit the scoreboard, these guys are going to get an easy kick out of the back half. So there are my two in the back climb. Let's move on to the midfield now. Well, let me put that away.
You're starting to run out of puff up there in Port Stephens.
Oh, does it go?
Bruce Gold. I'm going to run with this and talk about the midfielders until you get back.
Yeah,
let me have a bit of airtime, Smatho. You can
see throughout the midfield. Bear in mind, we don't have Tom Rockcliffe, so that opens up a bit of Travis Boak and Ollie Wines.
I'm going to jump in. I talked about the uncontested ball that Richmond are giving up. There's a lot of players for Port. Yeah, I'll just sit back. I'll take over.
Very good. All right, so Travis Boak and
there's I'm going to be looking towards the uncontested guys again myself. So by them, the guy that stands out to me is Carl Amon. There's 4 guys for Port. They're all around that $11,000 mark. Dersma, Butters, Rosie, and Amon. The other 3 obviously really highly rated when they came through their draft season a couple of years ago and they burst onto the scene. But Amon is performing from a fantasy perspective as well as any of them, and I think an uncontested game will suit him down to the ground. So I think with less name recognition, I think that makes Amon quite a good play there at 11,000. But really, any four of those guys, I wouldn't be worried about playing at all. We have talked about the big midfielders going well against Richmond for a number of seasons now. The two guys that sort of fit in there are Boak and Wines. I've got no real knock on either of them as well. I think there's so many options here for Port Adelaide, and I think they're all pretty well priced for this matchup. So it's going to be quite difficult to pick who you're going to go with.
All right, Hef. There's also the debut of Will Martin down here at 5,000. Will there be a good little plug-in play just to get some Tiger exposure?
Potentially. I'm not going to pretend to know too much about Will Martin. He's been in the system for a little bit. He was a captain up there of the Brisbane Academy side, so he did score some pretty high possession numbers as a junior. Apparently, he's been quite impressive in the pre-season. How that translates to scoring, I don't really know, but it's a pretty hard matchup. If I was looking, I would prefer to go Lachie Jones if he gets picked as a 5K option over Martin. If trying to find another Richmond midfielder, Jack Ross, if he does play, he seems to get a bit of love anytime he gets rolled out around that 8,000, but I'd probably prefer to spend up a little bit more on Jack Graham, who would probably like a tough style of game here against Port Adelaide, probably suit him. We saw what he did in round one. He was really impressive, so I'd be happy to roll the dice on him in a few teams, Jack Graham, at that price.
All right, let's squeeze him here. Leaves us not much cash here for the forward position, so let's run through some options here for the forwards, especially down the cheap here. Look, one I would like to highlight straight away is Charlie Dixon at 7,870. Went goalless last week with just a 41 fantasy performance, but as you said, his ceiling's there. You can get an 80-plus score there. Port, massive favourites. Surely we get Charlie a bit of a run.
Yeah, I think he's really well priced. Dixon, he's a bit of a madman. He'd be pretty angry with his performance, I reckon, last match against West Coast. We saw last year, if you just want a bit of reference, he did score 77 there when they beat Richmond halfway through the year. It's like he's got 10x in him, so much easy. He scores 10x a lot of the time here, I think, Dixon. So on that basis, he's obviously a little bit risky, like all big key forwards are, but the upside there is enormous with Dixon.
Excellent. All right, that hasn't left me too much money for this other forward. So as I reshuffle this particular side, go through some other forward positions here that we can target in this particular match.
Look, I'm pretty happy using this forward spot on another one of those sort of mid-forward, outside midfielders that I talked about with Rosie, Butters. We can't use Dersma there, but Rosie or Butters are both really well priced, really. Butters has had a bigger role this year through the midfield. Rosie's return might have just hampered things a bit last week, but I think they're still pretty well priced, and they just got outplayed by West Coast. So I'm not paying too much attention to what happened there. I think they're going to bounce back. So, Rosie fits in beautifully there. I think a range of those guys and Dixon is going to be a really popular option.
Do you reckon someone like even Stephen Motlop can pop after having some two cracking games to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he's shown he's got that sort of different role. Motlop, he's not playing as the small forward. He's playing a bit up the ground, and he just had a pretty ordinary time of it against West Coast. But like many of these guys, they can bounce back very quickly, getting back home. Yep. So I think we've lost Smatho again there. The pair on the caravan. He's back. The caravan of courage.
As you were saying about Stevie Motlop.
Yeah. I think he's not a guy that I'd be piling into, but he's definitely a guy that you could have a bit of exposure in. And he's not generally a very popular player, Motlop, but he's playing a bit more up the ground at times. Yeah, he's another guy that can bounce back from that disaster match against West Coast.
Thanks for Mark to saying that this particular team is going to win on Friday night. All right, Hef, let's get back into the box here. Look, sorry for the technical difficulties with the stream here tonight. We do apologise. Obviously, Hef's done a sterling job there, jumping in at times where I've seemed to disappear. But rest assured, I'll be back in the Adobe home next week for the next episode of the Down Under Show. All right, Hef, thanks for joining me for tonight. Hef, thanks for again. Sorry about the issues.
All good. Anytime, Smatho. We'll see you again next week. Good luck to everyone who's put some teams in on the weekend.
All right, and good luck to all of our Draft Stars insurance. We'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.